What's going on, stackers? Welcome back to the channel. Sorry I've been absent for a few days. I've been sick, under the weather, but let's get into the content for today. First off, we're going to start with Perry Ann Boring, and she's going to explain what's happening with Elizabeth Warren and her new bill.
It's important that the industry understands that in the Senate, Elizabeth Warren has put forward a bill that would effectively ban this industry in the United States. She has really misconstrued what this legislation does. She doesn't purport it to be a ban. She calls it an anti-money laundering regulatory fix for crypto, which really is very misleading because it puts unworkable requirements on the technology itself. She's been able to recruit 19 co-sponsors to this bill. So we have 19% of the US Senate today is on record wanting to effectively ban cryptocurrencies in the United States. We are facing an existential threat today in Washington. It is absolutely critical that the community participates in the political process and ensures that anti-crypto politicians are not elected into office. Because
Elizabeth Warren trying to shut down that crypto.
I think this banking point is really interesting because one of the things, and I'm sure Brian's noticed from his time from being the regulator to now, we've noticed this even the last year. A lot of the banks, basically all the banks that you would go to 5 years ago with a solution that said, hey, you know what, that SWIFT thing, why don't you put that to the side and we can give you a replacement network to send money overseas between banks. No one wanted to even have you in the room. But these banks are all moving very quickly with their own, desks being set up, their high net worth clients are asking for it now. And so they will evolve in the same way that others will have to come along. And if they don't, and if they're sitting still and not asking questions or haven't identified a smart young person to be driving this for them right now, that's a bad place to be.
Now let's get into the second clip.
Whether or not you're on the services side, the plumbing side, approaching it, that want to have some elements of this potential big market for central bank digital currencies. I'll let Brian talk to the US element of this, but what I will say, an observation that we have, and like many others, we have a business that is in almost a consulting business to governments that are trying to take some early steps in this. And I'm looking at my daughter who's in the front row, who's a big mountain girl as well, loves Bhutan, has spent time there. Our first MOU with a country that actually was interested in this was Bhutan. Because number one, the king could mandate that the central bank should look at a central bank digital currency. Two, every one of their transactions in their financial system runs via India, like their trade routes, given where they are on the subcontinent. And three, it's a young population that's regionally digital savvy, and they can do some interesting things. And so as we kind of go around the world and have these conversations, which are happening weekly, if not daily now, with interested central banks, it's not always the banks that are on the big banks around the world, central banks that are much further down the road.
And then lastly, I want to bring it to Naveen Gupta. He's going to break down some XRPL knowledge.
To explain what is RippleNet, and then also explain to us what does XRP stand?
Absolutely. So let me take a very simple analogy because that's the way it's easier for everybody to understand. So think about Cisco. So Cisco is a tech company, right? Now Cisco makes routers, right? And these routers are used by companies around the world. So for example, Arjun may use a router and Naveen may use a routers. Let's call them information nodes because routers are nothing but information nodes, right? And all this technology that Cisco makes and the routers essentially sit on the top of internet, right? And internet essentially is the carrier between Arjun and Naveen in this case for information, right? So if we think of Ripple, Ripple is the equivalent of Cisco in this case. So it's a tech company which essentially creates software, right? And then routers are nodes. So nodes in the case of RippleNet are banks, financial institutions who decide to participate in this money system, right?
Okay.
So you think of RippleNet as banks, as PSPs, people like MoneyGram, people like Azimo, people like many other institutions, Lulu, and many other PSPs or banks who decide to participate and become nodes, right?
Okay.
And then essentially XRP is...
Just 1 second. So RippleNet is the network which connects all these nodes.
That's right.
And that net is run by Ripple.
Yeah, so that network is facilitated by Ripple because essentially the Ripple software essentially runs it. But otherwise, when institution A sends information or something of value to institution B, Ripple is not participant to that, right?
Okay.
So A, in a peer-to-peer fashion, can send money or information to institution B or C or whatever the case may be, and that's how Ripple Net would essentially work. So the transactions are peer-to-peer, but of course the software that is running both A and B is proprietary or has been created by Ripple as a tech company.
Okay.
Right. And then of course, like the internet, blockchain is the internet equivalent, which is the system for money, and XRP is one of the assets like Bitcoin, like Ethereum that rides on the top of it. It's a public chain, right? So it's not proprietary to Ripple. But what we do is when we send cross-border payments, right? So when an institution A sends cross-border payments to institution B, like today we use US dollar. So to give you an example, when GBP moves into Philippines peso, GBP gets converted to US dollar. US dollar gets converted to Philippines peso. Exactly in this case, GBP gets converted to XRP into Philippines peso, but XRP is taken from the public chain, right? But you could do exactly the same thing with GBP into Ethereum, into Philippines peso, GBP into USDC, into Philippines peso. The reason XRP is used is because it's most suitable for payments, because it takes 2 to 3 seconds, it's extremely fast, and it's uniquely suited for a cross-border payment.
There we go, Naveen breaking it down very well. But anyways, guys, that's all for today's video. I'm going to try to get some rest, feel better. Shout out to our sponsors, So Much Send at SoMuchSend.com and at So Much Send on all platforms. If you guys could maybe subscribe, like, and leave a comment on this video, I'd very much appreciate it. Stay bullish and keep stacking.